Hello again. This is Kenny Fikes coming to you as the host of iKnow.media's Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity through empirical experience alongside reasoned application and analysis. Let's go around the horn, guys.
Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons. I'm a Montessori guide from East Texas who happened to have lived around the world and has experienced education around the world. So tonight's conversation is something I feel really powerful about.
Hi everyone, my name is Jay Ellis and I'm a mom of 3. I'm from Houston. And this year, I really wanted to travel a lot. That had been my plan. I knew I was going to do that for 2020. And then coronavirus came around. But what I do get to do on this show, which is very cool, is I get to learn about different cultures. And that sometimes fills in for the fact that I couldn't travel like I wanted to this year. So I'm looking forward to tonight's show.
Hey, I'm Michael Malobsky. I'm a pediatrician in Denver, Colorado, father of 7, and always excited to be part of the discussion.
Good to see you all again. Today, we're going to talk about the youth. What's going on? Why don't they know anything? Just sort of the basics, getting back to the basics. But it's not just the basics. As Michael pointed out earlier before the show when we chatted, it's just a sign of the times of growing ignorance. People don't read anymore. There's so much social media. People believe. For those of I'm laughing. For those of you who are kids, you won't understand what I'm about to say. There have been times that one of my children would say something, and they may have been 13, and I go, "Well, how do you know that?" And they just know, and I'm like, "What part of your worldly experience, your empirical experience, allows you to know this thing?" But they just know it, right? So some of it lies at our doorsteps. We're not as tough as our folks used to be. So let's start off with a serious topic. It was pointed out that there was a recent study somewhere, and Michael, I'm gonna let you lead off, but almost 2/3 of young American adults don't know that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And more than 1 in 10 believe that Jews caused the Holocaust. Now, it would be so disrespectful to laugh at that comment, which I almost did. But sometimes things are so stupid, you're left with nothing but an "oh my God" smiley face kind of thing. Like, I'm going to read that again. And more than 1 in 10 believe that Jews caused the Holocaust. That's sort of that Kanye West logic of black people chose slavery. So, Michael, why don't you start us off?
When I read it, I was actually a little bit blown away, but I don't know why we should be, because it falls exactly in line with themes that we brought up on the show about what's driving so much of what we see of what we've been seeing since this last 6-9 months, of a lot of anger and hatred and ignorance, and how much behavior is driven by ignorance. I think that we left off last show talking about people who live in echo chambers of their own construction. And here we see another symptom of that very, very phenomenon. And yes, I will admit that when you grow up as a Jewish person, whether you grow up in the United States or anywhere else, you have relatives. Most of us have relatives or relatives of relatives who were either killed or who escaped the Holocaust. So and have visited the Holocaust memorials at, like, the United States Holocaust Museum in the Smithsonian. And anyone who's lucky enough to go to Israel can go to the greatest Holocaust museum and memorial ever, called Yad Vashem. And so the idea that Generation Z and millennials have this much of a gap in their knowledge about the Holocaust, basic stuff that, like you just mentioned, Kenny, that not 6 million people were not killed, that it was way less, or that Jews were somehow responsible for it, or that it's a hoax or a myth, are absolutely beyond my ability to believe and comprehend. But we shouldn't be surprised, because it falls exactly in line with, as we've said, what happens when people can and do live in these echo chambers that they build for themselves. So therefore, they're not exposed, and then ignorance takes over.
Jay, what do you have to say lovingly, because we love some of them ourselves personally, but lovingly about, and I'm not saying ours are, but lovingly about the ignorant youth of today?
You know what? I think that we have that. We definitely have that. But I do think that largely they may be ignorant because we failed at the task of teaching them. I can't imagine that this was taught appropriately and they don't know about it, or they didn't remember what a big number, like even if you don't know 6 million, right? You know that it's an overwhelming number of people. The fact that anybody could say it was because of the Jews themselves, that they somehow caused it, I have never heard that. And it's a sad commentary, because like, I don't even understand how that would work. Like, how did they cause it? Are you saying that they rounded each other up and killed one another? I don't understand this. And it's as ignorant as saying that the slaves caused slavery, that Africans caused slavery. So that's troubling. But I really do think that if they didn't learn it, there's some place that we went wrong, and we need to look at that. Did we fail to expose them to enough culture or sufficient history? Did we fail to demand that our schools were accountable and teach this and world history? Were we not looking at the curricula that our kids were receiving enough? But I feel like it's not entirely their fault. Now, we know they can be willful, but someone should have taught them. So what happened? That's what I want to know.
Well, and here's something that really shocked me to my core, because I felt like a failure in terms of certain history. And my daughter will look you straight in your eyes and say, my dad talks to me about everything and teaches me a lot of stuff. But even with that, you realize how much you don't get. When she was 12 years old, I said something about Malcolm X, and she said, who was that? And I thought just not just who is that from her, but from my daughter, who I am in the world, how I've lived my life, Malcolm X being my hero. That just never came up in one of our conversations, and I thought somehow the school had taken care of it, which is crazy of me. Elisa, what do you got?
So every child's very first teacher outside of themselves is their parent. And I think what we sometimes think are that when we send them away to school, that the school is going to cover everything. Well, it's not realistic, because if Malcolm X, so Kenny, I appreciate Malcolm X in the world. And I know some people are like, they don't appreciate his role in history, but some teachers are really uncomfortable teaching him, and they have to deal with the backlash of parents coming in and saying, no, he hated white people, or he hated Jewish people, and so they can't teach him. And so there's a lot of subjects, though, that at the end of the day, the teachers run out of time, or they know that socially they'll have to deal with so much, the school board and all that. And I think if we go back to the ideal that it's our job as parents, we can't cover everything either. And I think that's why you're supposed to hit on the things that are most important to you and your value system. But then also we are supposed to give them the tools and the thirst to want to always be learning. I think it was Kenny, before we started the show, you were saying we don't read anymore. We don't read. Our little kids don't realize, if you sit in front, I'm going to have my phone out. If you sit in front of your phone like this all day, most of the time I'm reading something. My child doesn't know that. My child thinks I'm playing on an app. And so they no longer see parents sitting with books and thinking that that's cool. And so they've had this disconnect with reading, because also when you hand your 5-year-old the phone, there's a button that says read aloud. And so it will tell you everything. And so I think that's where, as parents, we need to have that reset. And I was hoping COVID would do it. Have that reset where we go, okay, here's the list of things I don't want to put. I want to make sure the adult I put out into the world knows or has a thirst to get to know.
Right. Okay. So what about, why do some kids believe that we live in a post-racial society? I know that the obvious answer is that we've had a Black president, but one of the toughest comments I've ever heard anyone say was a friend, I won't say his name, but he was in Philadelphia in the 90s. And he said, man, listen, he had some radical ideas about things, like drug dealers just go in the corner, put a gun on everyone's booty and pull the trigger. But he also said about racism, he said, when old white men die, racism will die. I don't believe that's true, but what's going on in terms of the youth, and they don't know about the things in the world that exist in terms of race? What do you think, Michael?
I think Elisa had a great point that we're living in a world where most information is consumed through social media, through online. It used to be, for all of us, it doesn't take a lot of memory to remember that you had, in the 70s and 80s, you had the newspaper, then you had the 6 and the 11 o'clock news, and that was kind of a way more, it was just, I seem to remember Tom Brokaw, I remember I remember Dan Rather, and I remember that it was a very objective, very clean presentation of what happened. There wasn't a lot of editorializing or altering or opinion. And then people would discuss it. You could watch your Sunday morning PBS news shows if you wanted more of that. And so, and people, there was more emphasis on reading, and people had to discuss, and people had to kind of evaluate the situation. Now, every news, it seems, that's consumed is saturated in some kind of opinion. And so therefore you are consuming stuff that jives with or resonates with an opinion that you already have. And so it's really hard to find even basic factual information. Like, even when I read that article about the Holocaust, part of me is like, all right, well, who wrote it? What opinion, where are they coming from? Maybe they have an axe to grind. Maybe these numbers aren't really the numbers, so because that's how I have to think about everything now.
That's right. So, in one of my jobs, speaking of numbers, I used to be a fiscal analyst at the Oklahoma State Senate, and depending upon who would ask me for information, I would say, well, what are you trying to show? Because I could crunch real numbers and give you statistics to show different things. So in my little goober days, I used to watch with my mom over dinner. We used to watch the McNeil-Lehrer Report, Washington Review. We used to watch Tony Brown's Journal, which is why I first heard a black man say that you have to be bidialectal and bicultural to be successful in this world. And there would just be serious analysis about that stuff. Now it might be like I'd look at a show and go, hey, this guy Michael has on a red shirt and a yarmulke. He's probably sponsored by George Soros, and the Jews are trying to take over the world. That's how things are presented now, right? Mm-hmm. Jay, what you got?
He's paying for my Subaru.
I think that I think it's kind of a double-edged thing, honestly. We wanted to get to a place in America where people of color had more freedoms, right? Where we could walk down the street without being yelled at and targeted overtly, where we would have access to jobs and schools and places to live that everyone else did. And we got that to a large extent. Now, we know that there's still racism, but in getting that, the world became far more comfortable for our kids in terms of racism. So they're not as aware of it because in their daily life, many of them go through life with people of other races and cultures, and there's no assault. There's no limitation. We can talk to them about a time when Black people couldn't drink from a water fountain or couldn't sit at a lunch counter. We can talk to them about that, but that's not their world. Their world is one in which they are quite likely sometimes to have friends who are of other races, and it's not a problem. You see more interracial couples, and that's accepted, and we wanted that. But in getting that, it also may give them a false sense of the world as it relates to racism. And then when things start going wrong, it's really shocking. I know for me, in terms of teaching my kids about racism, I knew that I had to do that, but I didn't know how to do that and strike that balance of teaching them enough about racism that they were aware and vigilant, but that I didn't terrify them, or that I didn't have them thinking that all white people are evil, right? It's kind of always keeping that balance, and you have to be so careful with what you're saying to your children and how you're delivering the message, and then not just what you're saying, but how you're living too. And so I think that we're in a very unique space. People who lived during the civil rights movement, they knew exactly where they were and what they had to teach their kids. It was evident that the threat is in your face every day and it's daily. So it's easy to teach the lesson. These days, it's a lot more subtle, the racism, and therefore they don't feel it as much as it was once felt. And I think a lot of them don't think it's that, not that bad. Mm.
So in a little bit of a hodgepodge, Lisa, you can follow up on that if you want to, but I want to ask a question about toughness since you have kids every day. you know, like bullying. When I was growing up, I didn't know what bullying meant. Like we're all kids, and if you can take it, you can take it, and if you can't, you can't. Well, sorry, so sad. Now it's sort of like, you know, someone doesn't like your I may be cynical here, but someone doesn't like your shirt and you're being bullied. Wham, wham, wham. Are kids just not tough these days? How am I just kind of an old fart here?
Well, you know what, bullying is a huge issue, and I think it always has been. But once again, it's social media. I honestly feel that cell phones are the devil, and social media is horrible. And so I think, though, that I think we have to realize our parents' generation, you know, we used physical reinforcement when it came to punishment and discipline, and it was seen normal and natural. Well, if you look at all studies on child development, that how crazy is that you go to school and hit someone, you come home, I'm going to hit you harder so you know not to hit someone else. And so if you kind of think of it that way, the new generation of parents were raised by bullies, because their parents become their first bully. And so then we're tough because we lived through that. We knew, like, CPS who? Like, there was no CPS when we were kids if you got spanked. And if you did happen to have somebody and you called them, they weren't going to do much, and then you got killed again. And so now we have this now this generation have become real sensitive to that. And we're like, oh no, that will never happen to our kids. Well, it's human nature to cluster together, and it's human nature to point out different things about other people. And so the ideal of bullying becomes a natural thing that we learn and grow past. Well, I think that with the softness that we've given our children, because we do coddle so much of what we want them to feel strong and big. Part of that, though, is not telling the other child to be quiet. It's not telling the other child, you know, don't say this about this person. Part of that is we have to condition our children not to be affected by what other people say, especially, but then we have this Instagram, we have TikTok, and they're desperate for likes. And you know, and all kinds of studies have shown that children get the same adrenaline rush from seeing how many likes they get, and the whole world likes them. And so, you know, there's not a I hate you button, because everybody wants, you know, I like you. And so I think as parents, though, we have to take responsibility and say, okay, I can't control the other parents. I can't control the other children, but I can teach my child that they have to choose to turn off their phone if they're getting bullied online. Like turn your phone off. Don't look at that. If they're getting bullied in school, how can they stand up for themselves without feeling small? And I think when it comes to bullying, I think it's a huge issue, but I do think that because we're so sensitive to everything right now, we're not giving our children the tools to stand up for themselves, and we're standing up for them.
So I believe, and this may just be the old fart in me, I mean, you can't put them in a frame and hang them on the wall and manage everything that happens to them. Like, to me, bullying meant there was, you know, if I'm in 7th grade and most of us are 12, and there's this kid who's 15 who we called it flunked, failed 3 times, and he likes to fight people because he can't read. You know, that's a bully. But if someone picks on your glasses or the shape of your nose or just really, that's just being a human being. And like you said, we're in the same cluster. And if you can't take it, you're going to have your mommy go behind you and wipe your tears for the rest of your life. I don't know. Maybe that's too old school for me. As far as corporal punishment, it sounds like you don't believe in it. My position is I don't have a yes or no. I think it depends on the kid. You could have a kid who all you have to do is tell them I'm really disappointed and give them a look like a father to a daughter, and that's all it takes. Or you may have a knucklehead who you've got to pop him in the back of the head, and once you learn that may mess up his eyes, you got to pop him somewhere else. And the kid who says literally, oh, really? I'm just going to get a ass whooping when I get home? I'm not going to make curfew. I'll take that ass whooping to stay out. That kid needs something else. So I think it depends on the child. And another kid just doesn't want to be hit. So that will put them in line. So I think it depends on the child. What do you got, Jay? Are you next? I think Jay is next.
Oh, it definitely depends on the child. You have to know your child, and you need to know what motivates them. Like, my mother knew I didn't like to be embarrassed. So that was her go-to. If I got in trouble, which was usually with the phone, And she'd be like, well, you're going to lose your privileges for the phone for 2 weeks. And she was like, and you better tell your little friends, because if they call here, I'm going to tell them. And that was going to be mortifying to me. And she knew that, so she could manipulate that. So sometimes you do have to know your kids. I think that when it comes to bullying, you know, you also have to know when it does become dangerous and when it is really affecting their morale in a way that they might go out and kill themselves, because kids are doing that. And that's what we didn't hear about in the past, right? So all bullying is not all that. Just, you need to just, like, you know, buck up and learn to handle it. Sometimes you do. I do think that we are definitely in that age of helicopter parenting. And I say that as a former helicopter parent. Somebody had to tell me, I had to hear it a few different ways. And one of the things that really resonated with me was when Taylor's school, they had this parent coffee, and it was about this article, I think in the New York Times, and it was called how to help your kids fail safely. Like, and that was a revolutionary idea to me, how to help them fail safely. And then it was kind of all around me, like the Girl Scouts had a training about it, and the Boy Scouts had a training about it. And I learned I had to be taught this, like, you need to step back sometimes and let them fail, because that's going to be the best lesson. If you rescue them all the time, then what happens when they leave your home? And there was even an article some time ago in the Wall Street Journal from a dean at Stanford. And she spoke about how the students were these amazing achievers, like total overachievers, totally successful, but they were coming to college and falling apart. And she said, that's because these parents never let them fail. So they were doing everything to manipulate their environment so they could be successful, and took away chores, took away other responsibilities, you know, bolstered everything so you can always succeed. But then what happens when you can't, and you don't know that you're resilient enough to get past it? And so I think we do end up doing that. And I think even with safety, we live in this very safety conscious world, right? Like, remember when cars didn't have seat belts, right? That was like, oh, that was an amenity on your car. And I remember when we did not wear helmets outside, when we went skating, we didn't wear knee pads and elbow pads. And now we wouldn't hear of that, right? Oh my God, my kid could get a concussion. And they could, right? But we are in this age of, like, we have to be safe, and there are all these studies, and then we get tickets for stuff. If you don't have a car seat in your car and your kid's a certain age, you're getting a ticket. Somebody doesn't have a seatbelt on, you're getting a ticket. So we kind of haven't found a way to kind of temper all of that, so we're keeping people safe without delivering them too much from lessons that they need to learn. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot in there to unpack. So as a pediatrician, what do you got about all this, Michael?
So there's a lot there. So I'm going to try and pare it down to the fact that, one, I'm going to address what Elisa said first. Bullying is a complex interplay between the kinds of kids we're raising and a more toxic environment that they're raised in. I know, Kenny, I totally relate to what you say, because as someone who was bullied a lot, and I'm going to say his name, Russell Odom. If you're out there, Russell Odom, I'm 6'7", 250, and I immediately like to get together. Russell Odom of Potomac, Maryland. Okay, so it happened. Okay, but the environment that our children are dealing with, and when I say their environment, I mean their entire virtual, digital, and real world, which, remember, what we call their virtual world is their world, as much as going to school and
I get a quick time out just to say, but that old school thing helped you, because when you told us the story about taking the train over to North Philly and going up to McGonigal Hall, for all who don't know, it's the basketball gym at Temple, and guys were like trying to start fighting with the 6'7". You had been through this stuff. You had some toughness. You weren't the kind of guy that was going to say, "Yeah, well, let's go right here." But, like, you just brushed that off and went and played your game. If you had been coddled, you'd have fallen apart. Like, oh my God, where are the cops? These guys are going to rob me, right?
You're right. You're absolutely right. There's no question. But on the other hand, once I escaped Russell Odom at 3:30 and made it home, I didn't deal with him. My engagement with him was over. So the environment is way more. Should we say his name more in case he's here? All right. So the engagement is over. So it is a combination. I'm saying it's a complex combination. And what you guys were addressing is exactly the words and the concept that more and more of us in pediatrics and in child psychology are trying to get across, is the idea of the growth mindset. And many of you guys have read, I know you have, Elisa, right? Carol Dweck, who is also a Stanford person. And in a nutshell, what she says, that when you are parenting in today's world, this stuff, Kenny and Jay, when all of us were kids, it just happened. Our parents didn't have to intentionally do it. It was built in. But now, parents have to intentionally, with clear planning, install things that develop the growth mindset. What's the growth mindset mean? It means that you are parenting and raising your kid in such a way that they are not threatened by failure, that they see failure as an opportunity to grow instead of something to be feared, because they've been raised to appreciate the process and not outcome, right? Meaning, so many kids I see are like these kids at Stanford, like the Stanford dean was talking about, their whole lives, they've been told how brilliant and smart they are. Well, when they're told how brilliant and smart they are, that means when they run up against something that challenges them that they can't do, it threatens their very view of themselves, and they can't handle it. Yeah.
Here's another interruption for you. Sorry, this is two interruptions in one show, but it's relevant. There's three of us here. At least I don't know what your path has been, but I know there's three of us here that went to an Ivy League school. So you say Stanford or Penn, but we're not spoiled brats.
No, but this is unique. This is unique to millennials and Gen Z. This is very unique because the helicopter and the version of helicopter that's even more, the snowplow parent who runs in front of their kid and removes the obstacles to maximize their success. So when their kid inevitably, and whether that happens in college or their first job, fails or runs into a situation that the outcome isn't what they want, they fold. Failure is to be avoided, not embraced as a path to improvement, or that intelligence is fixed. That I'm smart, I'm brilliant. That's a fixed thing, not that I know how to find the answers and work hard. So even when I run up against a situation that doesn't come out right, I know that I can overcome it and work around it. And I'm not dependent on the praise of people in order to feel good, that I develop an inner compass and sense of worth because of what I can do. That's the growth mindset. And that takes a lot of actual intentional parenting. Our parents, Kenny and Jay, and at least I bet, my parents are best described, they were submarines. What's a submarine parent? They were essentially out of sight. They weren't really that involved. They had a periscope up, they could see what was going on. And if they had to launch a cruise missile, they would. But that was a very different way of parenting, and that is very hard to convince people nowadays that we need to move back in that direction.
And why was the cruise missile? It was never going to hit your head. It wasn't going to hit your back. It wasn't going to hit your feet. Cruise missile is always going to hit your ass. What do you got, Elisa?
Well, it's interesting what Michael brought up, because this is actually my daughter's vocabulary words right now. And it's the definition for a child was a can-do attitude. I don't care if you're wrong. All I care about is that you try to your best to get to the answer. If you're wrong, we can reevaluate and get to the answer. But if you give up, you've given into failure. And if you give into failure, it becomes a habit. And we don't want to create that habit. I think, though, I am actually pro corporal punishment. We had a belt in my the young adults that I've raised. They had a belt named George. And if you needed, but we had what we called in our house spankable offenses. If you would only be spanked for these certain things. You weren't going to be spanked because I was in a bad mood. You weren't going to be spanked because you rolled your eyes at me. You were going to be like one of our if you lied to me, you were going to be spanked. I don't care what it is. If you break a car, tell me, we can fix it. But if you lie about it, I'm going to beat you. I'm not really beat, but spank you. I've grown out of that. But I think what we have to accept, though, is that when it comes to bullying, when it comes to corporal punishment, if you choose to do it or not, we have to think about children's psyche. And that's one of the things I think the past parents' generation, excuse me, guys, sorry about that, guys. The past generation did not think about the mental development of a child. They just thought we've got to get them each day to day, and get them to grow. some kids can handle bullying. You could say whatever you want to me. It was never going to bother me. Made parenting me very difficult. But those same people, I have siblings who my parents, what they could say to them would offend them or would hurt their spirits. You couldn't do that to me. So every person's if you think about the person as an individual, they're going to handle different situations differently, which is why, as Kenny was pointing out, spanking works for some kids, spanking doesn't work for other kids. Telling a kid to buck up when they're crying, hurt on the ground, works for some kids, but then some kids need you to go over there and help them stand up and brush them off. I think what we have to try to do, though, with all the chaos in our lives right now, is you have to parent on purpose, and you have to make the decision. I regularly tell my parents how to set their children up for failure. I will set my students up for failure, and the reason why is because once they fail, I can then guide them on the steps to succeed. But if they fail and crash, then I need to work on the fact that they don't know how to fail. But they can't know that I'm the one guiding them. They have to feel like they're taking it upon themselves to reach those steps. And a lot of parents just swoop in and are like, oh, you need to read a book. Well, look, they read the book. Read it after me. The dog crossed the road. You say it now. Your child did not read that book. You did. And so I think that a lot of parents just don't think about what adult they're putting into the world, and their goal is to undo the damage from their childhood, and it sometimes causes a bigger problem because their child's a different person than them.
Well, we are, as Homo sapiens, animals in this universe, and there are single cell animals like the amoeba and the paramecium, and I'll never forget that study. I think it was high school, where it was maybe the paramecium, where they shine the light and they shock it. And then they shine the light and they shock it. And they shine the light and they shock it. And after a while, once you shine the light, it flinches, even if you don't shock it. So at a certain point, I can go to small and little. I like these anecdotal personal things because I think they're good things for other people who may watch us. But, when my son was maybe 5 or 6, maybe not that young, 6, 7, so, I'm not going to really hit a kid hard, right? But there's getting in trouble. There's the paddle. There's the happy stick. There's just something where it doesn't hurt, but it just really hurts their pride more than anything else. And I remember his mom saying, well, I don't want him to not rob the bank because he's going to get in trouble. I don't want him to not do it because he knows in his heart that it's wrong. And I said, well, I just don't want him to rob it. If he can figure out why later, great. Or as he got older, I would say, I think there's a cat outside. I'm sorry. I would say, my job is not to be your friend. Maybe when you're 24 or 28 or 30, you'll look back and you'll know, hey, my dad taught me some good stuff. So you can hate me today and I really don't care. But I'm your dad, not your friend. If you want to be friends, great. Maybe that's just old school for me. Right now, I have a 20-year-old, and we've been going through some tougher lessons because I admitted, I said, listen, I think just as a dad and a daddy and a daughter, I think my love has allowed me to just let you coast to a little too easily on some things. And so we're raising the standards, and it's getting a little tougher for you right now. And it has been. And that's intentional for me. Because as I said to her, I've got to know that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you're going to be all right. That's the point. So Jay, I think's next.
You know what? I think that being a parent is one of the hardest jobs that there is. It's exhausting because you're always a parent, right? You don't get hours off or days off. But more than that, sometimes the lessons we want to teach, it's not what we're teaching and we're not even aware of it. And that makes things very difficult. I think probably for many of us, when we think back to when we were kids and there were things we went through and things we really didn't like, or things that we felt just wounded us psychically, we decided we weren't going to do that to our children. We tried to give it thought. And Elisa spoke about the fact that our parents, or maybe it was Michael who said it, they weren't worried about that. Childhood development, the development was going to be, I'm going to condition you not to do this anymore. That was the development, and you needed to be along with it. But I think we kind of have overthought it at some points, and we're like, I don't want my kids to ever feel that way, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to parent differently. But there are always going to be kind of consequences of how we do things. Sometimes the consequences are great and it works out. and other times not so much. I think that for those of us who grew up in households that didn't have a lot of money, you know, like I wanted to make sure my kids had all this stuff. I didn't. What I learned was that they didn't appreciate it. And why couldn't they? Because they always had it. In order for them to really appreciate certain things, they need to be without it. One day, my mom came into my house and she's like, you know what we need around here? She's like, we need a deprivation day. And it's like, we kind of did, because if you've always had your own room and your own bathroom and all the, you know, clothes that you want and electronics that you want, you don't really know what it is to want, and you really don't know what it is to need. So how can you really appreciate things? And when she said that, I had to think about the fact that I hadn't even given my kids a chance to appreciate things. I just expected them to, because they got it. But that's just everyday life for them. But I think, you know, we often parent because of how we were parented. And unlike our parents, we don't choose to always parent like they did. We think about it a lot, and we try to be a kinder, gentler type of parent, which doesn't always work. I mean, there were some things that our parents were right on point about. There are some things you don't need to explain to kids. It needs to just be because I said you need to do it, right? Because if you understood why you needed to do it, then you wouldn't need a parent. And I have to remind myself of that. I'm supposed to be wiser than they are, even though I don't always behave like I am. But I think that's where we get into trouble. We overthink parenting.
Well, we'll let Michael take us out. But one thing I've heard parents say, and, you know, Michael, you can get on my case for being insensitive about it, but I never understood, just make up a name. We'll say Josh. The kid's name is Josh. This is totally fictional. And the mother would say, well, Josh won't. So I'm like, what do you mean Josh won't? What? Like, I don't even understand that as a father. There's nothing I could ever tell anybody, billions of people in the world, and say Miles won't or Sydney won't, and they're my kids. I can't even relate to that. Help me out.
The first thing I have to do is that at the beginning of each show, I tell everyone I'm a pediatrician, and I am, and I'm board certified. So I have to officially distance myself from the corporal punishment discussion.
Yes.
It is, the evidence on child psychological development is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And there really isn't the question anymore that it's not a healthy way to, in today's day and age, to raise your kids. So I'm not judging anybody. I just have to put that out there in case someone associated me with that concept, because I can't be. Second, I'm gonna end the show, gonna do the mic drop end with what I told my 18-year-old daughter when she graduated high school. She asked me to write something or to buy a page in her yearbook. She only had like 16 girls in her high school class, so they all get like 2 pages. So I took half a page and I made a beautiful, beautiful design, and I wrote, I think we could all relate to this. There's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. There you go. I think that says it all. I think we can all learn from that what we need to.
I like it. All right, guys. Been good, fun.
Yep.
Appreciate you. See you next time.
All right, guys. Good night.